Hi, I'm Marcus Arvan from the University of Tampa. I'm going to be commenting today on Kevin Thurston's paper, Money, Market, and State, Dichotomizing Forums for Private and Political Speech. I'd like to begin by thanking David Killeran for organizing this conference, which I think is a really great idea, a great way to draw undergraduate philosophers into the discipline. I'd also like to thank Kevin Thurston for the opportunity to read his very stimulating paper. While, as we will see, I'm not yet convinced of some of Kevin's main claims, his paper raises a bunch of very good issues that I haven't thought carefully about before, and hope to think more carefully about as I move forward. I'm very thankful to Kevin for bringing these issues to my attention. In my comments, I'll just raise some worries I had about some of his claims. I'm not sure if all of the worries are correct, nor am I sure about how problematic they all are, but still, I think they are worth thinking about some more, perhaps in future drafts of this paper. Kevin's paper concerns the very important question at issue in some recent U.S. Supreme Court rulings, including most notoriously the landmark Citizens United ruling, of whether money is speech, and whether an important distinction exists between speech in the marketplace and speech in the political arena. In broad outline, Kevin argues that money is speech, but that it is not the kind of speech that should extend into the political arena. Kevin begins his paper by rejecting, correctly I think, the claim sometimes made that money is not speech. Money is, of course, not literally speech, but it is, Kevin points out, a form of expression, and there are moral and constitutional reasons to protect the right to free expression, including the expression through the use of money. Monetary exchanges communicate all kinds of important things in a market, Kevin points out, among other things, what one can afford, what one prefers, and what one is willing to spend for what one prefers. This information is crucial for markets to run well. So far, so good. Kevin concludes from this on page 9 that, I quote, "There is no conceptual difference between exchanging money for milk or burning a flag in political protest. In both scenarios," he writes, "a material object is put to some use in expressing a preference, desire, or goal." Now here I must demur, especially given Kevin's argument to come. One could argue, as Kevin does, that money is a vehicle for expressing private, self-regarding preferences, whereas political expression, for instance flag burning, expresses an individual's beliefs and preferences regarding the common good or some such, in which case maybe there is a conceptual difference between monetary speech and political speech. Or maybe not. Anyway, let's return to Kevin's main argument. Kevin argues on page 6 that, and I quote, "The marketplace in general is a forum of competition, self-regarding welfare, enhancement, and private discourse. Money speaks for our private sentiments, and others are affected by those sentiments only as byproducts of satisfaction or realization of those sentiments. As such, the marketplace is a vast aggregate of private individual preferences." In contrast, Kevin holds, first, following Jon Elster, that politics should be an open and public activity, distinct from the isolated and private expressions of buying and selling. Second, Kevin argues, following Robert Goodin, collective political activity launders preferences so as to direct them towards longer-term public goods. Third, Kevin holds that political activity launders preferences in such a way that those preferences provide ex ante satisfaction. A person who votes for a bridge is happy, for instance, that the bridge will be built, whereas market choices only provide ex post satisfaction. One is only happy when one gets the thing one purchases. At one point on page 7, Kevin suggests that these differences are based upon a tacit conceptual difference between market-oriented expression and political expression. However, soon afterward on page 8, he suggests that it is merely a substantive difference between how expression works in these forums. One question I have for Kevin is, which does he think it is, a conceptual difference or a substantive one? Either way, I'm not yet convinced by Kevin's main claims for these differences. Let's examine more carefully the 3 claims Kevin defends regarding differences between speech in the marketplace through the exchange of money and political speech. Claim 1. Money exchanges primarily express private, self-regarding preferences. Claim 2. Political expression launders preferences, converting them into long-term ethical preferences concerning the social or public good. Claim 3. Whereas monetary exchanges only provide ex post satisfaction, political expression provides ex ante satisfaction. I'm not yet convinced of these claims. I have three worries about the first claim, that money exchanges primarily express private, self-regarding preferences. First, although many, and perhaps even most, purchases in ordinary everyday markets probably do express private preferences, Kevin often uses the example of buying milk to illustrate this. The very point of the Supreme Court's Citizens United ruling is that monetary contributions to political candidates, super PACs, or other political organizations can express long-term ethical concerns for the public good. If I give money to Barack Obama's campaign, for instance, it's probably because I prefer his political views about the public good and his plans for achieving it over his rivals. Second, people can and do express their ethical views in the marketplace. The practice of buying green has soared in recent years as people have become more concerned about the environment and climate change. Now, Kevin briefly raises in response to this point on page 6 when he writes that, and I quote, "Even selfless charitable contributions originate in a desire to express a private sentiment," which he clarifies and illustrates in footnote 5, where he writes, and I quote, "My giving to the Red Cross expresses my belief that the Red Cross needs and is worthy of my donation. While the action benefits others, the expression is not speaking for them." I have to confess that I find this way of defining private versus public preferences, where a preference is understood as public just in case it speaks for others, very problematic for reasons I will now discuss. Arguably, a free society should be one in which people get to speak for themselves, not for others, and the government functions in the common good of all. This brings me to a third worry, which is that I think Kevin may be underestimating the manner in which ordinary everyday public market transactions can generate, by way of the proverbial invisible hand, an expression of the public good. Allow me to explain. One of the things that frustrates proponents of free markets is the manner in which critics of the market seem to ignore its very point. In a free market, people voluntarily make choices on behalf of their preferences. If I buy a widget from a widget maker for a price I'm willing to pay and a price she's willing to sell it for, we both benefit. Thus, setting aside market failures, which I think democratic governance should address, the end result of market transactions are mutual benefit for all. Now, I don't know about you, but the mutual benefit of all citizens sounds a lot like the public good. Right? And what doesn't sound like the public good? Well, 52% of voters imposing their visions of the public good on 48% who disagree. Now, although I think there are many places to push back against this argument that the market makes everyone better off, and thus is a better mechanism for the public good than democratic voting, which only satisfies majorities, I think it is too often ignored, dismissed too quickly, and worth taking more seriously than it often is. Anyway, these are my worries about Kevin's first claim, that monetary speech expresses private self-interested preferences and political speech public ones. The worry, again, and to summarize, is that private transactions, including political donations, can express ethical preferences about the long-term public good. So that's the worry. In part because I'm somewhat more congenial to Kevin's overall position than my worries here may seem to indicate, but also because I'd like to not simply raise worries but offer constructive feedback, I'd like to offer a friendly suggestion. I think it may be a good idea for Kevin to simply argue that there is a greater tendency for the market to advance self-regarding preferences than political speech. I think there may well be such a tendency, but I think some empirical work needs to be done to establish it. And so I would like to suggest that Kevin brings some empirical evidence into the picture. Perhaps even if market exchanges can express ethical preferences regarding the social or common good, which I've suggested, one may argue on empirical grounds that it's not a good mechanism for doing this, or at least a worse one than a political system where monetary influences are restricted from politics. I suspect there probably is a lot of data from other nations where campaign financing is a public matter that would help support Kevin's position. Allow me now to turn to Kevin's second claim that political activity launders preferences in a manner that the market does not, directing preferences toward the public good. Here I also have a couple of worries. The first worry is similar to those that came before. Kevin's argument seems to me to presuppose that there is something like a clear line between the market and the political arena. But this isn't obviously the case. consider political super PACs, which exist to support political parties and candidates. Even if we suppose that public political processes launder preferences, directing them to the long-term public good, as Kevin claims, the very things that Kevin is calling the market, monetary exchanges including donations to super PACs, are interacting with and responding to those very political processes. The market process and the political process is not distinct. People are giving money to the super PAC because they identify with the candidates and parties' conceptions of the public good, which is developed in the political arena. Now, of course, one could argue here that, well, the monetary donations are corrupting the political process. But on what grounds? If I'm right, one can't argue that it is grounds on selfishness or preference aggregation, as Kevin is suggesting. For again, as I've just suggested, this isn't obviously the case, at least not without greater empirical argument. No, one has to argue here that the corruption is of a different sort. Well, what sort, perhaps? Well, the usual criticism of money in politics is that it gives some people, the rich, or else masses of those with money, far more speech or the ability to express themselves than people with less money. But that's a different criticism of money in politics from Kevin's. Right? Kevin's is based on concerns about aggregation and the selfishness of preferences in the market, not about how money in politics gives greater speech to those with more money, which is an argument that others have pursued before. Finally, I also have another worry about Kevin's suggestion that political processes launder preferences, directing them towards the public good, that Kevin actually raises at the tail end of the paper. Why think that political processes launder preferences in this way? When I look at Democratic and Republican parties, I don't straightforwardly see two parties concerned with the public good. I seem to see two parties that seem mostly concerned with satisfying the self-regarding preferences of their party members. I see a Republican Party that wants to limit women's access to abortion and contraception. Women's ethical preferences be damned. Right? I see 52%, or Republicans wish, trying to impose their will on 48%. Why not think that a free market, which enables, again, 100% of people to voluntarily interact in ways they judge to be in their own interest, to be a better method for achieving the good of all, the public good? Finally, I'm also not yet convinced by Kevin's ex-ante, ex-post satisfaction claims. Many market transactions only satisfy people ex-post, when a person gets what they pay for. But by no means all do, in particular, political contributions. When a person gives to a political candidate or super PAC, they are paying for things they hope to see to occur, changes in legislation, and so on. Moreover, the political process can change their preferences in precisely the way Kevin is suggesting political processes do. The preferences they express through monetary political donations, right, can change a person's preferences. When a person gives money to, say, Mitt Romney, they're giving him money to get his point across. And the very point that he tries to get across can change that very person's moral, political, and economic preferences, depending on, for instance, how well Mitt Romney makes his argument, say, in debates and in other public forums, such as the news. So in conclusion, I think that Kevin has raised a lot of really interesting and important questions in this paper about the differences between markets and expression of individual preferences through markets and expression of preferences in the political arena. However, I'm not yet convinced by his main claims that the differences that he's focused on in the paper are a reason to not include monetary expression of a person's preferences in the market should be excluded from the political arena. So I'm curious to see what Kevin has to say about the concerns that I've raised. And again, I'd like to thank him for his paper, which I found very interesting. And I'd like to thank David Killeran again for organizing the conference. So, all right.